So just a bit of background on how we came up with this, etc. Before we jump into four theses that we'll present. So we have been, as you know, our job is to interact with entrepreneurs, right? We do that quite a bit. We meet 8 to 10 companies every week, and that gives us a very good sense of what is happening in the ground, right? In different sectors, etc. So what we have done is we've selected 15 of those sectors, like alternative protein, blockchain, brain computer interface, uh, climate tech, data privacy, energy storage, enterprise workflows, healthcare screening, MLOps, nature, co-design, quantum, robotics, space, we have two, and synthetic content, right? So the generation. So these 15 areas we have selected and sort of did a deep dive into it and try to project how Word would be in, let's say, next 3 to 5 years, right? 2026. So that's the whole context of this report. And methodology essentially is that we have, for each of these sectors, we have first of all tried to put this on a resonance map, which I'll explain in a moment, which helps us determine what is inflecting versus what is not. Second is we have also tried to figure out what are the key tech drivers that have happened, which are driving this change, and what kind of use cases it is unlocking. So that's the broad construction of each of these sub areas that we will dive into. A bit on this framework called demand and supply resonance map. Some of you might have read our blog also that we had published a few months back on this. We use this very consistently in all our decision making on investments. Very simple framework, very common sense, sensical sort of a framework, but we have used this as a backdrop for all our sectors. So it's important to know what this is about. Very quickly, so we have two dimensions here. One is demand and supply. So demand is basically represents the market readiness. The market could be hot versus latent versus unaware, and supply could be how you are realizing it. It could be a very simple solution, or could be very hard sciencey kind of a solution, or something in the middle, which we call as the deep tech, or simply put, harder tech. So if you think about it, this category B emerges as a interesting category where the technology is such that it is realizable and therefore not science, and at the same time it is not copyable and therefore not incremental innovation, and the market is also ready. So we typically look at slightly enlarged area of category B. We call it the art of possible. But for this talk, what we have done is we've tried to take this backdrop for each one of these sector and try to plot some sub trends in it as well, on where we are today and where we anticipate them in 5 to 6 years, right, to 2026. So that's the whole backdrop of how we have used it. And so to start with, what we thought is we'll present 4 sectors, and if there is time or interest, we could present some more. And we will, with that backdrop, let me hand it over to Shubham for blockchain. Yeah, go ahead, Shubham.
Yeah, thanks, Manish. Hi, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. So just starting off with blockchain, because it seems to be the hottest word in the town these days. So as a fund, I think we are very bullish on the underlying infrastructure and the rails that are being built to enable blockchain technology. So until now, blockchain has been synonymous with cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, but it has very little of that has percolated down to real world use cases. We believe that with scalable solutions coming in, and the folks who are building in enabling these blockchain solutions for real world applications will lead to a large outcome in the future as blockchain moves from a promising technology to mainstream technology. In the blockchain space, blockchain currently, I think everyone is pretty aware of it. Even enterprises, large enterprises have started to take note of it in how it can be adopted into their work streams. So it's a very, it's bordering on apparent and latent sort of in terms of the need. And from a technology perspective, while it is a little difficult to build, and that's because the technology is in its infancy. We believe over the next 4 to 5 years, blockchain development would be as easily, readily available as an app development in the current scenario. And so some of the things that will lead to this shift would be smart contracts, positive regulatory frameworks, which are being subsequently implemented by governments all over, and new and novel architectures that solve for the three holy grails of blockchain: scalability, decentralization, and security all at once. The future of blockchain looks very exciting and interesting. We will all have digital assets and identities as we currently do in the physical world. There will be definitely be reserve central bank currencies as opposed to real world currencies. And additionally, enterprise adoption will go through the roof. And we will also talk about some of the use cases. So what's stopping blockchain from taking off right now? So we've identified some major challenges and where we feel that as a fund we would like to participate in. One is the lack of scalability. Your blockchain 1.0 and 2.0 were capable of only processing 5 to 15 transactions per second. You now have layer 2 solutions built on top of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but also new layer 1 solutions such as Solana, Avalanche coming up that can fundamentally do thousands of transactions per second, leading to scalability. So that's one main area we are keeping an eye out on. The other is lack of interoperability. So imagine if I had a Gmail address and someone else had a Redis mail and we couldn't send emails to each other or communicate. I think that is what is currently existing in the blockchain ecosystem. But you have folks, really smart folks building interoperability frameworks that can connect and transmit data between two blockchains, either on-chain or off-chain. Finally, for enterprise adoption, we believe not all data needs to be readily visible to everyone, especially when it comes to supply chain, financial data. So federated blockchains and privacy protocols such as zero knowledge proof will lead to a constant stream of adoption on the enterprise front. And finally, just not a tech challenge, but more a UI UX challenge. I think currently the technology is very difficult to build and very difficult to understand. If any one of you has ever used a decentralized exchange to buy one of the crypto assets. So we believe that as folks develop the Rails and people start building more user-friendly applications, the ecosystem adoption will definitely rise in the next few years. And just briefly touching upon some of the applications where we see blockchain playing an outsized role. Definitely banking and finance, cross-border payments, P2P payments, decentralized finance, both from a lending, staking, yield perspective, trade finance using smart contracts, a bunch of use cases in banking and finance. Then you have assets. I think NFTs are the word of 2021. But apart from digital asset ownership, which will lead to new revenue streams, I think physical tokenization of physical assets is going to be very interesting. This would enable transparency and fractional ownership, thus providing democratization to a lot of assets that are currently outside the scope of most individuals. We will all have secure digital identities. I think that is a given. And with this identity, I think we will have much more control over our data. This will reduce online and identity fraud, and users will own their data and give access to individual apps rather than platforms owning our data. And finally rounding it off, I think decentralized applications, whether they be decentralized media networks, social networks, decentralized marketplaces. Imagine an Uber without an intermediary sort of connecting the users and the cabs. I think all of these applications will take off as blockchain becomes more mainstream. So I think so really excited about the blockchain ecosystem, and I think I see a few questions. We will take them up at the end. But additionally, I think another space that we are really excited about with the whole focus on climate change and sustainability is alternative proteins and how that will impact the food system over the next decade. And I will request Akhil to speak about it.
So thanks, Shubham. Thanks, Manish. So coming to alternative proteins, so we see that today plant-based dairy and meat are commonplace across grocery stores in the world. However, these are largely marketed to and consumed by a certain section of society, making them almost superfluous in terms of need today. But to wean a considerable amount of the Earth's population off traditional meat sources and onto alternative proteins, like onto alternative proteins, we like cellular methods of producing meat and plant-based meat and precision fermentation technologies are going to prove to be vital. However, so going to the next slide. So we've mapped out 3 different ways of arriving at alternative proteins based on how we see the awareness and tech developing over the next 5 years. Here, precision fermentation refers to the genetic reprogramming of microorganisms to then its genetic makeup to then produce casein, which is used in cheese and ice cream. So it's possible to get dairy-free milk products. Similarly, here cellular agriculture refers to lab-grown meat, where we take animal cells in a bioreactor setting and provide them the requisite growth media and conditions so that you're able to produce meat in a lab-grown setting. So awareness of all 3 of these ways of getting to alternative proteins has been on the rise, steadily on the rise, largely because of the new socially aware, conscious consumers, and the fact that it's now general consensus that traditional methods of producing meat and dairy are inherently unsustainable. Regulatory support by governments like Singapore has also provided a much needed impetus towards adoption of alternative proteins. So within 5 years' time, we expect plant and precision fermentation based proteins to be ubiquitous, right? To be available all around us. But that being said, the panacea for being able to shift a considerable amount of the Earth's population to alternative proteins is cellular agriculture. However, this is currently cost prohibitive and the technology hasn't yet been scaled up to a point where it is commercially viable. To this effect, there have been some.
I think what we will do is we'll probably just come back to this in a bit by the time Akhil comes. And sorry about this, folks. Internet creates some issues, and we'll go to the space tech thesis. The group on leading that. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Manish. So in this report, we've covered the space tech sector with 2 flavors, one across launch and the second one is in space. So I'll cover in space today. In space refers to any activity or operation that would happen once the satellite has been launched and is in orbit. And the kind of shift that we anticipate would happen in this segment is from deployment to in-space management. So if you see today, most of the focus is on launching satellites and objects. And with that, that is happening because the cost of launch is reducing. And also, there's a lot of focus on deploying more and more satellites into space. And with that happening, there are going to be a new set of problems that will emerge. And there will also be a new set of requirements that will come up. For example, space getting crowded. There's going to be monitoring that's involved. There's going to be a need to make sure that the assets that are in orbit are utilized well. So hence, the focus will shift towards in-space management. So this sector, we have broken down into 3 sub-segments. So first is space traffic management, which refers to monitoring and controlling the orbiting satellites. The second one is in-space manufacturing, which entails manufacturing parts in space without having the need to carry them all the way from the Earth. The third aspect is in-space servicing, which refers to maintaining and servicing these satellites while they're orbiting so that the lifetime of these satellites can be extended. So if you see how we map this on the map, on the demand resonance map, at this point, all these three subsegments are hard technologies. And on the demand side, relatively on the latent side. How we foresee this changing across next few years is that these technologies will continue to stay difficult to build, although they will get a little easier, but still hard tech. And there will be considerable amount of awareness that will come into these segments. And primarily on the space traffic management, the demand will go up because this is something that is going to become a pressing and critical need over the next few years. Next slide. So these are some of the technologies that are enabling this shift. So the first one is a combination of AI algorithms along with sensors like LiDAR, which will enable detection of objects that are orbiting in space, which is important to understand whether there's any collision that will happen. So today, the kind of technologies or sensors that are used are mostly radar, and these sensors are not able to detect objects which are, let's say, less than 10 centimeter in size. And this is very important because most of the human-made objects that are orbiting around us, and these run into millions, are less than 10 centimeter in size. So the capability that AI and LiDAR together can provide will be able to make sure that these objects are detected, even the small ones. The second technology is advanced propulsion systems. So today, most of the propulsion systems rely on chemical-based propellants. However, there is a lot of progress that is happening on cleaner forms, for example, electric-based or water-based propulsion systems. And this is important not just from sustainability perspective, but also fuel efficiency, because some of these fuels can actually be better controlled than chemical-based approaches. Next one, on the material innovation side, there are a lot of experiments that are happening on using alternative materials. For example, there is work happening on using wood to manufacture or build satellites. And the advantage here would be that wood can burn without leaving any debris, as well as releasing any harmful gases into the atmosphere. Finally, space-grade robotics is going to really enable some of these automation, which will be not only from maneuverability perspective, but also for automating a lot of tasks, for example, docking, loading, and also doing repairing related activities. On the use cases side, so these are some of the example use cases. So first is space traffic management. Like we've discussed, these objects need to be monitored to preempt any collisions that might happen. Second is on the space debris removal. So with the space getting crowded, there are going to be chances that collisions will happen and more objects will be orbiting. So how do we remove space debris from space? So there's work that is happening in which there will be orbiting pods which will identify debris, latch onto it, and remove it from orbit. The third use case is in-space manufacturing, which is producing spare parts on demand when you need them right there in space. And as you can imagine, this would result in a lot of cost savings because these spare parts will not have to be carried from Earth. Another interesting concept that's coming up is dedicated space factories, which is essentially understanding the space environment and taking advantage of it to manufacture products that are best manufactured in those kind of environments. For example, there's work that's happening on manufacturing fiber optics because the cables or the products that are manufactured in space are much better quality than those manufactured on Earth. But of course, the economics for such things will have to be seen. Lastly, in-space servicing and refueling. So just the way there are digital twins that are coming up in factories, we'll see digital twins coming up in satellites as well as at constellation level, so that the operators are able to remotely monitor these satellites, understand whether there is any problem and be able to perform remote diagnostics. In addition, there's also this concept of service pods, which will be in orbit, which will go and latch themselves to satellites and be able to repair and, let's say, do any hardware replacement that might be needed. So these are some of the use cases that we will see over next 4 to 5 years. For the next one, I think we'll cover synthetic content creation, unless Akhil is back.
I think he's still away, Rupan.
Okay. So Akhilesh, can I please request you to take that up?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rupan. And thanks a lot, folks, for being around here with us. So another 3-4 minutes worth of presentation. We'll kind of wrap it up with synthetic content creation, and then we'll get into some Q&A. And that Q&A should roughly last for about 30 minutes. So what is synthetic content creation, right? It means a generation of content across various forms, primarily using AI and ML technologies. So in the coming 5 years, we will see that content across text, audio, and video will completely be created by AI without any need for human intervention. Content will be generated across multiple use cases such as movies, music, art, and more. And we think that the content creation using AI will go from being used casually today to be deployed commercially at scale over the next 5 years. So today, given that creator tools are time consuming and expensive, we've been seeing a shift from manual content creation to automated content generation, which has also lent to the development of open sourced AI tools for content creation. We see the future of content creation to be led by AI, where tools to generate content across use cases will be very widely available. And to support this development, new laws and business models will also emerge to encompass inclusion of the synthetic media. Now, if we plot awareness of this problem on our demand and supply resonance map versus difficulty of building the solution, then we see that text processing, audio and video production will significantly move towards being more apparent and easier to build, to an extent where synthetic content creation will very likely go mainstream. And so today AI is able to generate audio and video separately, right? With scripts for movies that are completely being capable of being generated by AI. But the primary challenge in terms of technology lies in underlying neural network models that are still not developed enough to produce a seamless audio and video experience on screen. But in the coming 5 to 6 years, AI will be able to create, let's say, 10-minute movies, right, within minutes, which usually takes up to several weeks today, which includes pre-processing, shooting, and post-processing. Now, this shift will come on the back of strong technological advancement across audio, video, and text, right? So generative adversarial networks will be used for deepfake creation and lip reconstruction, for dubbed content, where AI will comb through tens of thousands of data points as part of the training set, and will be able to accurately recreate lip sync on a virtual avatar. Another example is dubbing today is done with first converting input speech to text, and this will be possible to do without having to use text as an intermediary, and directly through speech to speech translation. Now, encoder decoder transformer models will democratize text processing and audio production. Now let's take a look at a couple of example use cases for synthetic content creation using AI. Synthetic audio in the form of instrumental music and soundtracks will be creatable in real time, right? With user input, themes, genres, and moods. A digital artist, would typically be able to animate their work and add a fitting soundtrack to it without any oversight. Influencers will appear in video content without ever having to participate in a shoot. Right, the AI will synthesize the influencer on screen with lip reconstruction and animation, which will completely be automated. Now, it is very likely that a Disney movie coming out in the next 5 to 6 years will be completely generated by AI. Right. Another example is an artist will also be able to combine 2 separate genres of art to create a completely new style, and AI will assist with visualizing concepts. Imagine artists tokenizing their work on a blockchain via NFTs today. AI in the next 5 years might also be able to generate art and then tokenize it on a blockchain without human intervention, completely automatically, right? So, that was our presentation across a few select topics right now. And unless Akhil is back, we are more than happy to kind of open up for. Okay, so Akhil's here. Akhil, would you like to kind of complete the bit on alternate proteins?
Yes, I would love to. Sorry about the internet issue, everybody. I'm actually at a neighbor's place dialing in. My internet just went out.
Akhil, you were on this slide or the next one?
Yeah, I was on this one. I just moved to the next one. Yeah.
Okay. Go for it.
Yeah. So just for the sake of continuity, I'll just repeat a little bit. So we're in 5 years' time, we expect plant and precision fermentation based proteins to be ubiquitous. However, the panacea for shifting a considerable amount of the Earth's population to alternative proteins is going to be via cellular agriculture, which is currently cost prohibitive and is a technology that hasn't been scaled up yet. So to this effect, there are tech innovations that are driving commercialization efforts, such as improvements in the bioreactor design and the use of biosensors can help gain cellular level data in terms of different parameters like cell vitality and on ways to improve the overall efficiency of the bioreactor process. And also recombinant proteins form 98% of the cost of the culture media that is used for producing cell grown meat. Figuring out alternative ways to produce these proteins and figuring out ways to use lesser of them is going to drive reduction in cost. So coming to some interesting examples, people who follow a plant-based diet have to take collagen supplements because this is something that the body requires but isn't available in a plant-based diet. So using precision fermentation and genetically reprogramming yeast, it's possible to obtain animal-free collagen, which can then supplement plant-based diets. And coming to cultured meat in general, with it seeing adoption, it's possible for us to imagine a world where one can have Wagyu beef for the price of chicken nuggets, irrespective of where you live. And in a situation, maybe a decade from now, where this technology is scaled up and more commercialized, we can decouple where someone lives or where the rarity of a meat or its availability in a certain geography from how expensive it is. So it might be possible for people to consume cruelty-free meat with the same taste and texture wherever they are without needing to import said meat. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Akhil, for that. I think with that, we can probably jump into the Q&A. And given that blockchain was our very first topic, Shubham, I think there's one question. We'll start off with a fairly general question. So what are your views on interoperability in blockchain in the coming future?
Yeah, I think the interesting thought that why will blockchain networks want to go for interoperability if it affects their own revenue and user base? I think it's a way. I think it's more of a mission that if you see a lot of the blockchain startups, they open source the algorithm. So anyone not willing to adopt and share open practices, I think within the blockchain ecosystem will get left behind. So now when you have folks who are building all these chains and bridges, anyone who will keep their system closed will ultimately lead to a loss of users for those networks. So I think it is only fair that anyone not adopting interoperability will not exist in a few years' time.
Great. I think there was another question, Shubham, in terms of blockchain, right? So, do you know of any specific examples of fractional ownership which cannot be replicated in physical systems?
So it's less a question of whether it can be replicated. Let's take the quick use case of real estate. You can obviously create an SPV, have 50 people investing in the SPV, and the SPV owning the real estate asset, and in a sense, that's fractional ownership. However, if you want to now dispose of your ownership in the SPV, it is a complicated process. Now imagine if I had a house and I created, let's say, 1,000 sort of tokens. I tokenized my house and created 1,000 tokens, and my house was worth $1 million, and I only needed 100,000. I could really sell off only 10% of the tokens. or mortgage 10% of the tokens. And this is currently not possible if you don't have tokenized physical assets. So I think tokenization of physical assets, while it might be possible without blockchain, the process is just so much more cumbersome and expensive.
Awesome. But I think there's another question on alternative proteins. So do you think that the lack of a regulatory framework for 3D bioprinted implants using biomaterials will make it slower?
So I think this is actually on the biomaterial front. So for biomaterials, what we've noticed is that whether or not there is a regulatory framework exactly in place, a lot of companies have been tying up with whatever product they're trying to replace in a biological manner. So that helps validate the technology and helps drive a few initial customers. And eventually, when the regulatory framework gets a bit clearer, they will be well positioned to take advantage of clarity over there.
Got it. Thanks, Akhil, for that. I think Pratyush had a question with our in-space thesis. So this is for Rupan. Do you foresee any in-space applications for launches to asteroids or planets in the given time frame?
So actually, I would break it into two. So if in the time frame that we are talking about over the next 5 years, yes, so the category which is near Earth objects, yes, those launches will happen. But for deep space exploration, I think that would take off more around 5 to 10 years time frame.
Got it. So there was another question on this, Rupan. So, is the market opportunity for the space theme largely B2G, or is there also an opportunity for B2B? And yeah, I think we can start with that.
Yeah, so yes, I mean, over last, let's say, couple of decades and all, it has primarily been driven by the government. So it's been B2G, but things have changed. So there's a lot of B2B influence that's there. So a lot of, and this is happening because of the kind of use cases also that are coming up. So with satellites being in orbit, there are multiple use cases. For example, insurance, understanding economic activity, understanding the climate change, the impact. So a whole lot of use cases that have come up, which have very strong business impact. So there is B2B is a very strong, let's say, revenue channel that is coming up. So it's not just restricted to B2G anymore. And yeah, not to forget about the internet availability, right? Communication and internet.
Yeah, so there's another question, I think, under synthetic AI. So, we can also detect heart rate easily and use it, as an input to create or select music. And yeah, that can definitely be a case, Mohit, in the near future, because we're already seeing emotion tech kind of being built out for facial recognition of, basically recognizing human emotions through our expressions. And that is kind of being used as a sales use case at the moment. But yes, it is very possible that in the coming 5 to 6 years, AI will be able to read your heart rate and be able to kind of generate, let's say, a calming soundtrack for you in case there is something that's very tense that's going on around you. Another example, is today what's happening is that in the world of gaming, you have apps that are kind of automatically generate music, kind of partnered with these gaming companies, and what they do is as soon as there's a tense scene within a game, or rather when you're kind of shooting someone, then the music kind of builds up to that automatically, and that is something that we're already seeing today from a perspective of computer vision, but then we will kind of also see a use case within detection of human emotions and generation of synthetic content. I think there's another question under our ML ops thesis. So do you have any more insights, Akhil, on the data adoption, data fraternity, use tools and ML deployments?
So across the ML deployment space, so we've seen a lot of tooling come up for every single part of the data stack. So tooling on the ETL front in terms of aggregating data, tooling in terms of democratizing model development. But bringing machine learning models to production has still proven to be notoriously difficult, right, throughout. So we see that tooling that can abstract this infrastructure layer, where data engineers currently don't want to be doing Kubernetes or containerization. Data scientists want to work on the model development and the monitoring part instead. So we believe that tooling that can abstract this and help unlock productivity in data scientists is something that could really be big, and that's what we're bullish about. And within this as well, there's a lot of tools that are consistently that tools keep coming up across different parts of the data stack, and tooling that can help people or help data science teams modularly insert or use whatever package or whatever tool for that one use case as per their need. Like, say, if you want to use visualization, you can use preset, and if you want to use ETL, you can use Fivetran or Stitch. So choosing the tooling that helps you for your use case, and tooling and something that can orchestrate all of this together is also something that is definitely bound to pick up.
Yeah. So Amar, just to quickly answer your question, yes, we will send a recording to this, and you can watch it at your convenience as well. Rupan, I think there was someone in chat who wanted to know a bit about non-invasive BCI.
Okay. Any specific question around it, or
basically pretty general? So I think any insights that you can drop on BCI would be welcome.
Yeah. So okay. So BCI has been in the realms of science and R&D for a very long time. But what we feel is over the next 5 years or so, it is really going to get commercialized, especially the non-invasive BCI part. And that is happening because traditionally, the quality of BCI headsets has not been really, let's say they've been very clunky, cumbersome, but there are new designs, new materials that are coming up. And a big difference is that there is high accuracy of BCI that is coming into market. And we're going to see a lot of applications, some of them already out there with companies like Muse, helping with guided meditation using non-invasive BCI. But what we will also see is clinical applications, wherein, so if you see, right, all this while it's been, you use your brain activity, you understand and measure your brain activity and are able to control the external devices. But over time, what we will see is that it is going to become bidirectional with neurofeedback going back to the brain. So in terms of clinical applications for people who've had, let's say, conditions like stroke, non-invasive BCI can be used to stimulate those parts of the brain which can bring in neuroplasticity. So those are some of the applications that will come up, especially in the non-invasive BCI side.
Yeah, I think there was another question that came in as well regarding regulatory framework for deepfakes. And to be honest, I think the jury is still out on that, where we are seeing more folks, more governments kind of take more of a federal approach to figuring out deepfake regulations.
Yeah, I think on that, rather than regulations and governance, we'll probably see solutions being adopted by companies which identify when there is a deepfake versus, let's say synthetic content versus an actually generated content. So that clarity will be provided by private players. So that should really help.
Yeah, and Harpal, brought up a pretty valid point here, right? Can we also see content creation that reflects industry context and understanding? That is a marketing brochure for a product. So this actually is a two-way problem, right? So this also falls into our marketing automation thesis. And yes, of course, the full pipeline over here would include, let's say, text generation all the way to audio and video production, right? So that you kind of enter a script and then the entire output is a seamless video with a fitting soundtrack to it, in terms of answering a couple of other questions. But in terms of specifically talking about marketing brochure for a product, yeah, we can see multiple info packs or memorandums or marketing brochures for multiple different products across use cases be generated at the click of a button very simply. Also, I think Rupan, there's a question for you. So you mentioned in-space and launch in space tech, right? So what are your opinions on downstream technologies and software infrastructure players on ground in the ecosystem? I think there's another question, but I'll get to it after this. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually, if you see, space is a very, very broad sector. So we just covered two in this report. There are a lot many. For example, deep space would be another sector. But on ground is another segment which is very interesting. And if you see, so far it's been very traditional legacy kind of systems that are out there. So innovation in that aspect would be beyond looking at, let's say, beyond radar, what kind of infrastructure can be built. Also today, if you see the most of the space stations or let's say ground monitoring systems are very, let's say, on the ground, can't be moved. So what we will see is that there will be mobile stations, ground stations that will come up, which will give you a better coverage of, let's say, the satellite data that is also being transferred. That is one aspect which is around the infrastructure and hardware part. Second thing would be also because there's going to be a lot of data that will go back and forth to be able to utilize the use cases and generate insights out of it. So a software infrastructure layer to be able to consume this data and build insights on top of it will also be something that actually it's already coming up and will accelerate over next few years.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next space tech question, there's one for Shubham. So Shubham, Shailesh asks, how do you foresee policy and government programs assisting or inhibiting growth, like the current government's prohibitive action on cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I think any country that sort of takes a negative stance on crypto in general, on blockchain in general, so I would separate it out into blockchain technology and crypto assets. I think any country who doesn't sort of fully embrace blockchain will definitely be definitely left behind, as has happened with companies who didn't adopt AI and other forms of tech. There will definitely be centers that will be the meccas for blockchain development. Singapore has taken the lead on that, and so has Switzerland. So I think, and so Dubai is also coming up very strongly. So I think economies and geographies that decide to support the enablement of such technologies will definitely have a head start on the next 10 to 15 years.
Awesome. I think on that, Shubham, there's one more. So what will be the specific use case for DeFi lending?
Yeah, specific use case for DeFi lending. So as more and more assets become tokenized and go onto the digital sort of chain, you will be able to lend against those assets digitally without the need for paperwork. And what is typically going to happen is whatever ownerships that you have, you'll be able to prove that through blockchain. You'll be able to go to any sort of blockchain DeFi network and actually put it up for lending or for borrowing. And similarly, people who are invested, people who want to borrow will be able to borrow at lower rates using these platforms. And folks who actually have invested in these assets as part of just a regular investment will be able to get a yield on those assets by lending to borrowers. So I think the DeFi sort of goes well with the whole NFT and tokenization space, because then that's when real world assets will be, you'll be able to sort of lend and borrow against them on the blockchain itself.
So, another question for Rupan, I think it kind of pretty similar to the previous one, but space tech is highly fragmented and siloed today, right? How do you see the sector, that is from both a government and corporate perspective, collaborating in the future?
Yeah, so the collaboration is already happening, and we of course have a lot of examples in India itself. And to be honest, this change has happened only over last 1.5 to 2 years, wherein I'll take India's example. So ISRO, so space in India has mostly been run by ISRO, but over last 1.5 years, things have changed. There's a lot of focus on bringing private players into this sector. And for that, there's a lot of, let's say, policies and bodies like InSpace that are coming up and helping some of these startups, especially with technical expertise, with also providing permissions for potential launches in the future, also helping with the testing of some of the components. So that collaboration we're already seeing happening in India, and I know for sure that some similar stuff is happening in US as well. And we've heard about the partnership between NASA and SpaceX, right? So there's already collaboration that's been happening and will continue.
Awesome. So I think there's another question, with OpenAI doing a heavy lifting on synthetic text generation with the latest transformers, what do you think is the big disruption we can expect in the domain in the coming years? Yeah, so OpenAI has kind of come out with GPT-3, right? And they have been making waves. But what we expect to see is that, in the coming 4 or 5 years, for this technology to be able to generate very, very high accuracy, even for very, very specific use cases, right? So let's say that you are looking at the legal space, then the legal speak and the legal basically the lingo would be accurately generated using your own transformer model, which might not necessarily today be the case with what OpenAI is currently able to do, because that is more of sort of a generic database that it's been trained on.
Further on, to add to that, there is just doing text is not enough. You have to, for example, if you want to put it along with video, then other complexity comes up with lip construction, lip sync, etc. So to make a realistic content, you need 2-3 things to come together. I think that will also be super important as time goes.
And another question, Manish, I think I'll direct it to you. So it was a part of the question with the DeFi lending that Soumya asked, but I think to kind of help everyone out over here on a broader term, how do you think Pi will know that specific hard tech is feasible in the near term?
Yeah. So I think this is something we do. We don't get it right all the time, but essentially we try and do evaluation on technologies. We go deeper in technology when we are talking to a founder or a startup, trying to understand whether what they're trying to build falls in those 3 columns, right? Either very simple tech or science or somewhere in the middle. And then take an educated guess on what is possible in what time frame. I think to test this theory, the biggest leap of faith we took, and it's a little bit of an art, a little bit of a science, a little bit of just a leap of faith. So we did Agnikul. We backed Agnikul a couple of years back, 3 years back, and they want to do 3D printed rocket engines, and we don't know so much about rockets, right? So in that one, this particular skill got exercised to the limit, where we interacted with the founder. We saw the rocket engine design, etc. We talked to some experts and then came up with an assessment whether rockets can go up in space in the next 2-3 years or not. So, and we were able to do that. So it's a little bit of a mix of interacting with the founder, learning to see how they're doing, using our own common sense and talking to the domain experts to figure out an assessment.
Cool. So there's, I think, another question for Rupan here. So what is the investor's expectation for investing in a non-invasive BCI startup, right? So a follow-on to the question is an investor ready for funding customer discovery and research, or do you expect immediate market entry from a startup?
Yeah, I think for that one needs to understand what is it that is going to be disruptive in BCI space. So if you see what the current problems are, one is the signal processing, the signal acquisition itself, whether it's accurately happening. Second thing is signal processing, whether you're able to extract the features well, so that the classification then happens accurately, because brain activity is non-linear, non-stationary. So there are a lot of these challenges. So if someone can solve for these problems and build that, let's say, technology, which is able to very accurately classify what brain activity is going on, and then accordingly have a use case. So there are 2 things. One, you create a use case, or one is that you create a platform which other people, developers, can come in and create applications on. Either of these work as long as the tech that is being supported or being built is accurate. So yes, we can, I mean, as an investor, if there's a disruptive technology that is coming up in BCI space, then yeah, that is, I think, would probably be attractive. Customer discovery would be great, but if it is not there, then, but that's okay.
Got it. Thanks for that, Rupan. I think, before we before I hand this back to Manish, just one quick thing. Akhil, did you want to give some insights about OpenAI?
Yeah, so about OpenAI, first thing first, so there have been larger, more complex models that have been built after OpenAI, which are yet to be validated, but could possibly be better in terms of results. But that being said, a lot of these models have been trained on data across the web. So they inherently have a lot of bias associated with them, and this has been proven as well. So another area of possible disruption could be, how does one go about debiasing these large networks, or how does one ensure that these big architectures are relatively less bias free so that they can actually be used in real world use cases?
Awesome. With that, I think we kind of are done with most of our questions. So Manish, kind of handing it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Hope it was useful. We will continue to bring out insights from some other sectors as we go through and learn more. If you like this, please do share your appreciation on the social media or wherever appropriate, and we will also share the recording of this with all of you, and also we'll put it on the social media. I think one of the objectives we had is that make this report public, so we don't want to sort of hoard knowledge, we don't want to believe in it, and as you can see, the entire report is out there in the public. So if you like it, just share it with your friends, share it with people who can use it in a good way. And thank you so much for attending the session. If there are some last minute questions, we can still take one or two. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming on for this session.